Hi, this is sort of building on their earlier questions about elevations, and specifically the earlier comment about Japan. They have a great layering of space in Japan or Hong Kong or a lot of other cities other than New York, whereas in New York there's always this tremendous emphasis on being at street level. So you take the Time Warner Center, which you have to, even though it's a newly built subway entrance, you have to leave the subway to get back into that building, rather than somehow connecting underground. So while 100 years ago at Grand Central, you do have this tremendous layering, or 80 years ago at Rockefeller Center, you do still have that layering. Somehow we don't do that anymore here, and the notion of public space in New York always seems to center around at the street level. What about the public space underground? Or if you were in Hong Kong, it would be, they have your sky lobby system, which I know we don't really like, but there's a greater sense of there's different kinds of public space and different tiers.
No, it's a good point. Rockefeller Center, Grand Central. What do we think about that? You want to speak?
Okay. The different levels. It's quite true that there's much less at the different levels in America than particularly in Japan, in which there's just an enormous amount of levels going down and going up, and the public sort of access to levels above the street is much higher than here, in which you don't think that after the second floor anybody's going to go up any further to go to a restaurant or anything else. But on the other hand, the levels that are higher that have been instituted in America, like for example, we were just talking with Gerald about Minneapolis, which has this system between all the tall buildings of elevated walkways, and which everybody has commented it's taken all the life away from the streets. So it's been seen as something detrimental to the city just because you created this circulation level at the top. So it's clear that in America there's not a culture, of working with different levels. And I think it's just a matter that enough models have been put in it that it could succeed. I don't know what you think about it.
I mean, certainly in Hong Kong, where there's just a tremendously small amount of land area, so the intense verticality is just so much more intrinsic to that culture, but also a lot of those spaces which you can kind of use as public space are not actually public. They're incredibly highly regulated. They're privately owned or owned by agencies that have a tremendous amount of resources to maintain them to the utmost level. I've never been in a cleaner subway system than in Hong Kong. So I think it's also a very different regulatory system as well. There's an enforcement that you can have in a public space and in a culture like Hong Kong that you can't have on the streets of New York City because of democracy. And I think that also makes the whole idea of what is truly a public space really fascinating. And for me, that's been what's really interesting working on these public plazas, is that really it's the street that is incredibly protected by the laws of democracy. And so again, the First Amendment, free speech rights, like we actually have very little control over what can happen in the street, what people can say, what people can sell, because it's so kind of tied to our legal framework and the American idea of democracy.
But I would also like to add to what Emily is saying, that we just have too much space. And we have an enormous country, and that's why we don't do this.